Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
I'm so glad you're joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on Being Biracial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. The number of biracial and mixed race people is growing at a fast rate in our country, creating many racially and ethnically blended families. With efforts underway to root out racism in every segment of society, it's more important than ever to understand their unique insights and the challenges that they face.
I don't wanna die for them to miss me. Yes, I see the things that they wishing on me.
The examples of biracial high achievers are everywhere. In politics, there's former President Barack Obama and Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris. With the British royal family, there's Meghan Markle. And in sports, Derek Jeter is proud of his biracial parents. Sometimes there's outside pressure to choose a side, as TV actor Shamar Moore found out. He went on Instagram to explain his love for his white mother did not take away from his love for his black father.
Anything that they say, anything that they do will be criticized, will be analyzed, will be trolled. And I think really the lesson here is to respect people for who they consider themselves to be.
I don't wanna die for them to miss me. Yes, I see the things that they wishing on me.
When it comes to music industry success, Drake is in a category all his own. He just reached a huge milestone, being named the artist with the most top 10 hits in the history of the Billboard Hot 100 chart. He openly embraces his biracial heritage. His father is African American and his mother is Jewish. Legendary hitmaker DJ Drama has a similar background and says hip-hop is bringing all races together.
Hip-hop has always, obviously been predominantly a Black and Latino culture, but it's allowed, people from other races to create these bonds and relationships.
Government statistics show that over the last 2 decades, Americans who are biracial or with mixed race and ethnicity are growing at twice the rate of single-race individuals in the U.S. They're on the cutting edge of a growing trend, which can be uncomfortable and confusing.
As a child, it's, it can feel like a disadvantage to be mixed race when you really feel like you struggle to find people to identify with.
Sometimes the way others see you can impact how you see yourself. Let's find out what our panel has to say.
Joining me for this episode is the legendary chart-topping, hit-making, artist-busting DJ Drama from Atlanta by way of Philly. Drama, great to have you on Street Soldiers.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Also with us is Mary Almonte. She's the founder of Young Urban Moms and a licensed New York State real estate broker. Mary, great to have you with us.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Also joining us is Dr. Jeff Gardere. He's a clinical psychologist and professor at Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Jeff, great to have you with us.
Great to be here with you.
Thank you. Mary, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and one of the big issues you keep facing.
So my mother is a Southern Black woman and my father is Italian, first generation here in America. And boy, I grew up, in a town in New York City that was predominantly Italian. And I took my father's last name, and obviously my first name's Mary, so I had a very Italian name. And when I would show up for school, people would think I wasn't me, because obviously my skin is brown. And so, growing up, both my parents are still together to this day, and they taught me, you're both Black and white, and don't let anybody tell you different. Unfortunately, though, when you're telling that story to the world, when you're perceived as Black, having brown skin and, Afrocentric features in any capacity, it's perceived as you denying your Blackness. So I think I would rub a lot of my Black friends and Black people the wrong way when I would say, but I'm biracial. And then when I would tell my white peers that, it really didn't make a difference because at the end of the day, I was viewed as Black to them. So I think that it definitely caused a bit of an identity crisis or a struggle to define my identity, right? Like I kind of felt like, I felt like I fit in nowhere until probably around high school when I encountered other, biracial people, or physically I felt like I fit in with a lot of the Hispanic or more Afrocentric Hispanic people. So I sort of, would kind of blend there. And so I think once I became a grown woman and was able to really assess the situation, I became comfortable with taking on the identity of a Black biracial woman. So culturally, right, I grew up very Italian with culture, right? Like on Christmas Eve, I'd have 7 fish, and I'd have Sunday dinner with Sunday sauce with my grandmother every Sunday until she died a few years back. But I am very much aware that in this country, and I think we're all really becoming more painfully aware of this in recent times, your experience is defined by what you look like. And I'm very much aware that I look Black and I wear it proudly. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Drama, in terms of your identity and also being in the hip hop sphere, we had a lot of artists for a very long time who were biracial, and then people found out later on because they thought it might impact, I'm talking about back in the day, on their credibility, or their street cred or whatever. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, for me, growing up in Philly, I have two parents that were very involved in, the civil rights movement. My dad was actually in SNCC, in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So, my father's African American, my mother's white Jewish, my dad's from Philly, my mom's from Boston. And I grew up between both households. My parents separated when I was very young. I actually used to go back and forth between my mom and my dad, like, week to week. And, obviously I came out very fair skinned, very light. And, I remember growing up, and my father was always very hard pressed to me to, let it be known that I was Black, African American. I never really was, I never grew up in terms of the context of identifying myself as being mixed. And obviously at a young age, it was a little confusing, clearly because of my skin tone, and, my mother is white and everything. And, just in my surroundings, trying to, again, like Mary said, going through a slight identity crisis. And for me, it was kind of the opposite of her, because I am so light, and people used to kind of ask me what I am. And, thankfully for my parents, they named me Tyree, you know what I'm saying? So it was like, there were times when people wouldn't even believe me when I said I was Black, you know what I mean? And I would, if my name was Brandon, they really wouldn't have believed me per se, you know what I'm saying? So, but growing up, I went through those times of telling people I was mixed, because I felt as though it was easier for them to comprehend than for me to just say I'm Black, you know what I'm saying? And people were like, no, you're not. Or, having to break it down and saying, well, my mother's white and my father's Black. And obviously, in America, I identify as a Black man, you know what I'm saying? When I came to Atlanta, I went to a predominantly Black school. I went to at Clark Atlanta University, and I think for me it was good just to really have, that experience at that age when I was in school. And again, you bring up hip hop. Like for me, I feel like hip hop was definitely very important in my life as far as, my identification and what have you. And then for me, even when I got into the game and started to really get recognized, the issue kind of came up again. And I remember for me, like, I'm not very religious, and so I never, when I describe my upbringing, I didn't always say that I was Jewish per se, you know what I'm saying? But by Jewish law, if your mother's Jewish, you are Jewish per se. And then, I even think about like when Drake came into the game and how he embraced that, and, and I found a fondness to that at the time. Again, I didn't have a bar mitzvah, or, so I didn't have a lot of, I didn't partake in a lot of Jewish culture, although I, from a family perspective, there was some. But, as I've gotten older, I still get the questions all the time, about what am I, or, when I would like, when I was on mixtapes and, and I would use the N-word per se, I remember people being like, is Drama allowed to use the word? Like, where does it come down? I'd be like, and I would make light of it and be like, yo, you think I could get away with this many N-words if, what I'm saying, I wasn't Black? So, but yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, I think about other people that are biracial and, coming up, I remember being like, well, does Bob Marley get these questions? Or, does Obama get these questions, have to explain himself? And obviously for me, because my skin is so fair, it complicates it for people in their minds. But you know, it's been a great ride.
Been an experience. Dr. Jeff, when you hear their stories, what strikes you about the challenges? Speak to those first for us.
Well, what I see is definitely what many biracial children go through, and that it's the one drop rule. You know, if you're just even the tiniest percentage of Black, society considers you to be Black. For a very long time, several years ago, I remember doing the Montel show, and they would have biracial kids come on. And I remember not Montel himself giving them a hard time because he's had biracial children, but actually, you know, audience members saying, you know, well, you can call yourself biracial, but you're just, you know, you're just running away from the fact that you're Black. And I think we've come to a place now where people can absolutely identify as being biracial and not being put down for it. It's their choice. As they say in France, it's their préférence. But I will tell you, for my two of my 6 children who are biracial, in that the mother is white and Jewish, we are raising the children. We made a choice, the mother and I together. I didn't browbeat her into it, but raising the children as Black, as far as racial identity and as far as their religious identity, they're being raised in the Jewish faith. But she has bought them Black dolls. We have the discussions at home where I ask them, you know, what race are you comfortable saying? And they say that they are Black, even though they are biracial. And that's absolutely fine.
Coming up, how being biracial changes the way others see you.
Drama, in terms of being biracial, do you feel like it gives you certain advantages? Because you know the Jewish culture, you know the African American culture. Do you feel there's certain advantages in understanding, having kind of like that dual awareness?
Yeah, I would say so in a sense. I mean, I feel like it's enabled me to navigate, you know, various rooms and various scenarios and what have you. You know, I question, I wonder, you know, and with that question, does complexion come into play? Obviously,
oh, yeah.
You know, for me, you know, being so light, it's like, you know, my friends joke with me to this day, like, you know, if we're in a car, like, let the drum drive, you know what I'm saying? Just, you know, I can, you know, in certain circumstances, until I open my mouth, I could probably pass. But, you know, interestingly enough, like when I even really first kind of like was making waves in the game, and I started, you know, my mixtape started to become a real thing, you know, before people knew what I looked like based upon the sound of my voice and how deep it is, which I get from my father. You know, I remember people just joking like, wow, you know, they thought DJ Drama was like dark skin and really like overweight, you know, I guess just because I sounded so boisterous. So when I first, you know, people kind of first put a face with a name, you know, I guess it gave me like, you know, a leg up in a sense, you know what I'm saying? So I definitely feel like there were some advantages for me in life as well as in career, and just, you know, again, like I said, just to be able to navigate, you know. But you know, thankfully for me, I feel like I grew up in a very like I grew in a very like liberal household, you know, super political, and you know, and very active within, you know, the streets and the culture, you know, and so for me, it just really, you know, it gave me a level of where I wanted to be in life, and you know, how I wanted to view the world, and you know, what my placement was for that, regardless of skin complexion or whether identified as Black, mixed, or mulatto per se.
And having that history of your family being involved in civil rights had to give you an extra measure of support too.
Absolutely, 100%.
Mary, what about you in terms of, do you feel there's advantages? Because, I mean, you have, for people who are watching this outside of New York City, you're in a heavily Italian, predominantly, overwhelmingly white, I might say, right? Neighborhood in Staten Island is where your dad's from. And your mother's African-American from the South, from a completely different culture. But do you feel that growing up that way has given you certain advantages in life?
I don't know that I define it as advantages, but I do feel like being exposed to different cultures kind of gives you, you know, a growth mindset, right? Like I kind of tend to think critically, and I can see multiple sides of situations because my parents come from such different worlds. And, you know, being exposed to, you know, very conservative Italian, you know, and by the way, people that I love who are very conservative in mindset. And then obviously my mother growing up in the Jim Crow South during the civil rights era, I think it positions me, and I guess this is an advantage somewhat. I mean, at least if I had political aspirations, it would be. It positions me to be a messenger during the crazy times we're living in right now. I mean, on my Facebook, you know, I often engage in these kind of conversations. And because my family and my friend base is so varied in mindset and ideology and background, there are some really spirited, and I'm using a nice word with that, debates that happen there that, you know what, with every post I post, I actually feel like hearts and minds do change. I mean, maybe not completely, like no one's going from a conservative to a liberal, but at least in terms of understanding each other, I think that, you know, I kind of serve as a medium because I have such a varied background. But I do feel like my experience has really been more races, more problems, because I feel like at least growing up, I mean, now that I'm an adult, I'm more secure in who I am and what's happening in the world. But as a child, it's, you know, it can feel like a disadvantage to be mixed race when you really feel like you struggle to find people to identify with. And again, like you cited in the beginning of the show, stats are showing that, you know, biracial children are on the rise, and probably at some point in the future, everyone's going to be biracial. But, you know, that wasn't my experience. And so it definitely was a bit of a disadvantage and a challenge socially and emotionally growing up under these circumstances.
In terms of the business that you do, how does the perception of your race play into that, do you think?
Oh my God. So it's weird you're asking me this question, because just the other day I was in the middle of a real estate deal, and two of the, you know, my counterparts who I was negotiating a deal with didn't realize that I'm Black. I don't know what they assumed me to be, but they just started talking so much crap about the Black Lives Matter movement, about, you know, how they don't want to live near Black people. I mean, it was just stomach turning, like it was awful. And honestly, it is a difficult position to be in because you need to make money, right? And you don't want to, and, you know, obviously I'm in a small town, so, you know, word gets around quick if you don't want to work with someone. But on the same token, you do want to stand up for your people. I mean, whenever I hear, and even as a child, subconsciously, whenever I hear anyone talk about Black people negatively, I envision my mom. And you know how protective everyone is of their mothers. Like, I'm not having that. So it's really tough. It's really tough to be in a predominantly not just white, but racist white environment and trying to conduct business, and people don't necessarily equate you with being Black because they feel comfortable to spew their racist views. It's awful.
And then that's another pressure on it. Dr. Jeff, what about this issue of having to choose? We saw recently with the actor Shamar Moore. He's a very famous TV actor, has a hit show right now that's out. He got into a big, huge thing on Instagram. His mother is white. His father is Black. He said, "This is my mother. I love my mother is white, and I love my mother." And then he took a lot of heat from people who said, "How can you say that? You're denying that you're, you know, that you're Black. You're really Black." What is going on with that? And he stood by his mom and he said, "I'm sorry, people don't understand. Love knows no color. Love is love. And this is where we need to be moving to as a society. This is the woman that gave me life. I can't deny her any more than I can deny the man who was my father." But what does that tell you about people and where we're at?
Well, it tells me that people are very judgmental, and they may be stuck more on color than they need to be, number one. Number two, this idea that some of them feel that they're colorblind. How can you be colorblind? You can acknowledge someone's color or their race, but it should not form your opinion about that person.